Have you ever felt overwhelmed, despaired, not knowing where to turn to? Well, I'd encourage you to turn to the Lord because in this episode, we're going to see how Job came to God with all that raw emotion, and we see our God as relatable because He's a relational God. And so I would encourage you to do the same. So you're welcome back to Explore the World podcast, where we do just that. And if you're tuning in for the first time, you're welcome too. The aim of this podcast is to encourage you to develop your relationship with God through the study of His Word. So in the last episode, we looked at chapter 6 of the book of Job. In this episode, we're going to be moving on to chapter 7. And as usual, I'm just going to read and stop whenever I feel I have something to talk about. So is there not a time of hard service for man on earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man, like a servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly looks for his wages? So I have been allotted months of fertility, and wearisome nights have been appointed to me. So I think what Job is saying here, don't forget that he's still responding to his friend. The name of the friend that spoke to him last time, just trying to get the name, is Eliphaz. Okay, I'm just looking back. It started, Eliphaz spoke to him in chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6 that we looked at last time was the beginning of Job's response to Eliphaz. So basically, what Job is saying here is that he's now comparing his life. Don't forget, this is the life of hardship that he's experiencing. He's comparing it to somebody that is going to do manual labor, and of course, it would be outside working, and he does not have any choice as to when his labor finishes, so to say, and he's at the mercy of his master. So he's beginning to see that, to see himself not coming to an end of the suffering that he's getting here. And I can understand that, because let us remind ourselves that this is a man that has lost so much, and it's just unimaginable to him the scale of his suffering. And he carries on in verse 4, actually from verse 3 up to verse 5. I will read from verse 4. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise, and the night be ended? For I have had my fill of tossing till dawn. In other words, he's so, remember, his health is not in a good state at the moment, so he's not having a good sleep. My flesh is now describing the state of his physical body now. My flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and break out afresh. So he's so in such a bad state that is probably a combination of the emotions and the physical state of his health that is making him not be able to get enough sleep. At least most of us, when we maybe you're in a situation where you're working very hard, like he was comparing himself to a man that is undergoing hard labor as a hired hand. At least when they go to sleep, because their health is okay, they can have rest. But in the case of Job, what he's describing is that he can't even sleep at night, because I think it's a combination of the way he would have been feeling physically and emotionally, and the state of his mind. So he really was in a bad situation. Now verse 6, he said, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and are spent without hope. So his days are going quickly. That's a description he's got there. Oh, remember that my life is a breath. My eyes would never again see good. The eyes of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does not come up. He shall never return to his house, nor shall his place know him anymore. So really, his thoughts are on him dying, because I think he was at a state where he could not see any hope, either in his physical recovery from the illness, it was, the physical state of his body, or even the emotional state that he was in, he could not see how he could get better. And that is why we saw in previous chapters where he was wishing himself dead. And here he's again going back to those kind of thoughts. And I'm just wondering about the fact that we as Christians today know that the power in what we say, and how much of the suffering that one should, how much should you be that you'll be speaking like this and wishing yourself dead? He certainly is speaking what's in his mind, so there's no two way about it that he is wanting to die because of the extent of what he has suffered. I just don't know how to take this or move away from this with regards to what we know now as children of God, with regards to how powerful what we say is, and the power in our thoughts as well. Let me know your thoughts about this. Therefore will I not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Actually, when I was reading this earlier, I thought this is Job still talking, responding to his friend. And I read something in the commentary that I often use, Barnes Note, and the commentator there said that Job was speaking to God. And I initially did not see it until I started reading further. And the reason I'm talking about this is the fact that sometimes it's always better, actually not sometimes, all the time, it's better to read more than not just take a verse in scripture and start analyzing it. It's best to look at the context in which the statement is being made, because this verse, it just sounds as if Job was responding to his friend. But when you further read down, which we're going to see now, we'll see that he's again now talking to God, complaining to God. And he said now in verse 12, am I a sea or a serpent that you set a guard over me? When I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams. So you can see that Job was not talking to his friend, because his friend would not have been the one that Job would have been referring to as giving him a dream that scares him, or saying, he would not have been saying to his friend that the friend is dealing with him as a sea to guard. So, and I see a lot of this kind of things when we're looking at either Psalms, when I've looked at Psalms or some of the prophetic books, when you see maybe the psalmist talking, and he's talking about the immediate future, and before you know it, the next verse is about something to come much later. And we see this as well in the prophets, writings of the prophet, where they may be responding to an immediate situation, and in the next verse, what they've said is about something that would happen in the future. So it just means, or showed to me, how we need to carefully look at scriptures when we're interpreting it. I'm going to go back a little to verse 14, where he said, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. So we see that Job did not have any respite whatsoever from his suffering. The loss he has experienced, what is happening in his body, the turmoil he's feeling in his soul, and the fact that he cannot rest. It's just really overwhelming. And then he said, you can understand now why he said in verse 16, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Yes, nobody's going to live forever, but he was very suicidal. No, I won't say suicidal. He was wishing death on himself. And let me alone, for my days are but a breath, which he has said earlier on in verse 5, that life is a breath. Of course, we're breathing now. The moment that breath stops, that means that the life is gone out of us. So this is my interpretation of what is happening in this aspect of the scripture, where Job was just very desperate and he's talking. You can almost say that he just talks sometimes, because he's supposed to be responding to his friend, but now he's talking to God, and it's just really just giving us a vivid picture of what he's going through in his body, in his mind as well. In verse 17, he said, "What is man that thou should exalt him? That you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him," verse 18, you visit him every morning and test him every moment. So Job is really wondering that why is God paying so much attention to him? It may appear as if he's talking about negative attention here, but nevertheless, it's still attention. And that just makes me also to see that man has a special place in God's heart. And Job somehow in his heart knows this. In verse 19, he said, "How long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva?" So I can see him now using a different expression for him dying. In verse 7, he said, "Life is a breath." In verse 6, he said, "But a breath, for my days are but a breath." And here in verse 19, he's saying, "Till I swallow my saliva." In other words, that's the expression he used to say that till he died. And all of this is saying that, God, you're constantly there, making things worse, not doing anything about it. Why don't you just leave me alone? And this is what I mean about the fact that our God is relational. So have you ever felt overwhelmed, despair, feeling as if the end has come, the most terrible situation, not knowing the way forward? The way to go is to go to God. We see here Job being very frantic, describing his raw emotions, exactly the way he feels to God, because our God is relational, and this is one of the benefits of having a God like the God we serve. This reminds me about the case of Prophet Jonah, that the Lord said to him to go to the Ninevites and preach, but Jonah said no, he wasn't going to go, and he went the other way. And it was because he understood God. He knows that God will forgive those people if they repented. Of course, we know the story of what eventually happened to Jonah, and then he went to Nineveh. And when he got there, he preached to the people and they repented. So when they repented, Jonah was angry. And I'm going to read what Jonah said to God. He said in Jonah, I'm reading from Jonah chapter 4, verses 1 to 3. I'll stop when I've reached where I want to talk about. So, but it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he became angry. So he prayed to the Lord and said, "Ah, Lord, was not this what I said when I was still in my country? Therefore I fled previously to Tarshish, for I know that you are a gracious and merciful God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, one who relents from doing harm. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." You see, he was angry and he was able. I remember I think I'd done a video or something on this, and I said that Jonah was so expressive, displayed his anger to God, and God was not angry with him because of that. He's a relatable God. And see what God said in response to what Jonah said. In verse 4, God said, "Then the Lord said, is it right for you to be angry?" So Jonah went out of the city and sat on the east side of the city. There he made himself a shelter and sat in it in the shade till he might see what would become of the city. Now, and the Lord God prepared a plant and made it to come up over Jonah, that it might be shade for his head, to deliver him from his misery. So you see, God wasn't even angry with him because he was talking to him like that. Now, what then happened? Let's carry on reading. So Jonah was very grateful for the plant, but as the morning dawned, the next day God prepared a worm, and it so damaged the plant that it's withered. And it happened when the sun arose that God prepared a vehement east wind, and the sun beat on Jonah's head, so he grew faint. Then he wished death for himself and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." And God said to Jonah, let's see, God said, "Is it right for you to be angry about the plant?" And he said, "Is it right for me to be angry even to death?" So can you see that conversation between a man and God? It's almost like, it's not almost like, it is like a father and son. Your children, our children, are free to express the way they feel to us. And that emotion, whether happy, good, sad, sour, parents will bear. The same God will bear. And so I think in this Jonah, as we're reading the book of Job, we can main takeaway from this chapter is the fact that our God is relational. And when we're feeling all those emotions, negative, positive, we should be able to approach him and describe our state to him, and he's ready, he's willing, because he's a relational, it's a God that is interested in relationship. So coming back to Job now in verse 20, he said, "Have I sinned?" So this is him still being very frantically asking God questions. Of course, he cannot be asking, he could not have been talking. We see now that towards the end, and actually from the middle of this chapter, he was not talking to his friend anymore. He was directing his speeches to God. So he said, "Have I sinned? What have I done to you?" Now, I just want you to see how much, what I've been saying. This man just sounded like Jonah. How he's talking to his father, being very sincere with his father. "Oh, watcher of men." If we're in any doubt, now we know he's talking to God. And, I have been collecting the different ways in which God is described. This is another. I think I saw one when we looked at chapter 6, the Holy One. He describes God as the Holy One. Now, here, he's calling God, "Oh, watcher of men," because he's giving God that, I don't know whether I should say nickname or description, because you remember that from the beginning of this chapter, he's been talking about the fact that God is not leaving him alone. So God is there at night, not making him comfortable, and from all the things that happened to him, and he challenged God by saying that, "What is man? Why would you not leave me alone? What is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, and that you should visit him every morning?" In other words, God is there all the time, and so he's called God, the watcher of men, which is a good thing, a good description. It means that God is there when you're suffering, God is there when things are good, God is there in need, is there at all times. At least he appreciates that about God. And I think I'm going to put that in my list of the description of God. The interesting thing is that even when God talks to people, or we see in places where he has appeared to maybe the Abraham, Moses, and he describes himself. When he appeared to Moses in the burning bush, he said, "I am." When he said Moses wanted to know who God was, and he says, "I am." In other words, he is who he is. He does not need explanation. He's the Almighty. He's in control. He is God. Here, Job rather, he's doing the same. He's giving God a name based on the situation. So he called God earlier Holy One when he was saying that God is righteous, so he is just and he will do right things. Here it says God is a watcher of men, because God is constantly there. I think we as human beings do the same. We name people, or give people appellation or title based on their behavior, which Job is doing as well here with regards to what he's calling God, or what he has called. So carrying on, he said, "Why have you set me your target? So, what am I a burden to myself? Why then do you not pardon my transgression? Remember earlier in verse 20 it said, have I sinned? So he's saying, why is God not forgiving him? And take away my iniquity. For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. So in other words, he's still saying that God is there constantly with him. And so the title of O Watcher of Men really fits God. And we know that indeed God is present, is omnipotent, omnipresent. I do know for sure that there are times when I have experienced God and it has just struck me that God indeed is faithful. And if you've had any particular experience like that as well before, when you feel that, oh, God has come true for me in this particular manner, let me know what's your appellation or so the description that you would have called God in such time, and put it in the comments. So thank you for spending time with me today, and I hope that if you have found it useful, that you would share this with your friends and family so that they can also enjoy this. And next time we're going to be looking at chapter 8 of the book of Job, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.